Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Paul Neeson with Sam Shepherd. Sam's the owner of Valasta, the Astaxanthin, which is an absolutely amazing food in a supplement form that's absolutely helping so many people. And I've been involved in health for many, many years, and I've never seen such a great amount of testimonials with this. Let me lower this mic here in the background. Okay, hold on. Here we go. Okay, so I wanted to get Sam on here to do a live Q&A. Sam is now doing live Q&A videos that he posts to Facebook and the Valasta newsletter and YouTube, and very informative stuff. But so many people ask me questions about this product. Sam, welcome back on the show. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.
Yes, Sam, your story is amazing. For those of you who don't know, Sam had cancer of the bones, and he had gotten better, and he contributes a major part of his healing to the Valasta Astaxanthin. Before we get into the questions, everyone needs to know in a brief way why they can't just go to the store or on Amazon and get Astaxanthin. What's the Valasta difference? I know what it is, people that have seen your interviews before, but this is such an important thing, why Valasta is so much better. So can you briefly tell us that?
Sure. One of the things we found very early on is that the astaxanthin that existed from the extracted algae was extremely pure. It was pure astaxanthin dissolved in a lipid, in an oil. And the problem is that in nature, it exists as has a glucose or a lipid attached to it. But in the process of extraction, that glucose and that lipid are cracked off of the astaxanthin to get the pure astaxanthin. And that made a huge difference. So we figured out that how to put the glucose back on the astaxanthin. So we did that. We were quite successful in that. We filed for a patent. Patent was granted in July of 2021. And unbeknownst at the time, the NIH got a hold of the patent and did some research to prove the merits of the patent. I was not a party to that, did not know anything about it. And then in November, they published that, in fact, our technology was correct. And that research paper is now available to NIH and shows that the glucosidic form, which is what's different than the other astaxanthins that you have, has an 8-fold increase in adsorption. So there's two mechanisms. The first one is a chemical mechanism where the glucosidic astaxanthin can react with the defense mechanism of the tumor cell and turn it off. That's called a PD-L1 inhibitor. The second one that we found out later on is that the cancer cell would pull that glucosidic astaxanthin into the cell because the cancer wants the glucose. It's called a Trojan horse, and I had done that chemistry quite a bit in the past life. And when it pulls it inside the cell, the ability of the astaxanthin then to donate electrons to free radicals causes the cancer cell pH to go above 10 and killing the cancer cell in less than 4 seconds.
Okay.
That's the big difference.
So basically, it's much more absorbable than any other astaxanthin out there.
Right. And the astaxanthin that's out there is only a surface inhibitor, whereas that's one form of kill. But if it's not a PD-L1 expressed cancers, that astaxanthin won't work. But when we put the glucose on and it can now go intracellular, it can get inside the cancer cell, that was a game changer.
Okay. Well, we're going to get right into the questions. Sam, thank you for explaining that to everyone. The first question is, somebody says, I would love to ask his take on treating epilepsy. with Valasta. I've read info on with mice in trials.
Yeah, epilepsy, when you wear a skull cap and you look at the gamma, the alpha, beta, and theta waves in the brain, epilepsy looks to be a extreme electrical dysfunction in the brain. And there's a couple things that can cause that. One is obviously ROS, reactive oxygen species. It's primarily the hydroxyl 3 radical. We see it in ADHD. We also see it in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's both. When the stress level gets very, very high, for whatever reason, it can be genetic predisposition to produce adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine. When those compounds are metabolized, they produce a huge concentration of these free radicals. So what I advise people with epilepsy, ADHD, and Parkinson's is to get your C-reactive protein measured. I don't care what age it is. Some children, up until age 42 in women and 50 in men on average, we're producing enough cellular antioxidant called glutathione. And that allows us to do a lot of stupid things when we're younger and get away with it. But some children genetically are predisposed not to produce glutathione. So you see the childhood cancers, you see the epilepsy, you see the ADHD, and whatever is causing that high concentration of ROS, it could be diet, pollution, it could be stress level. There's a lot of things that cause it, but the glutathione would typically mediate it. But it's worth a shot. There's a tremendous upside potential and a very low downside risk. And you'll know very quickly on the epilepsy. Make sure you have a way of measuring it. Hopefully it's not by seizures. There's also another technology out there called vledusa.com. And that technology works real well with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ADHD. In that technology, it sends a photon through the eye. You basically watch a flickering light at a certain amplitude and a certain frequency. And that sends that frequency to the occipital lobe, the hippocampus. Hippocampus resets. So both sides of the brain are flashing at the same frequency. In epileptics, we sometimes see one side flashing at a different frequency than the left side. And this has a tendency to lock that in. We block out the seizure frequencies. Epileptics are very susceptible to strobing lights. So we block out, we know what that frequency is, and in those devices, those frequencies are blocked out.
Okay.
Worth a shot.
Okay, and somebody mentioned under that same comment that they use it for autism. So I guess it's very similar to what you were saying with autism.
Yeah.
Great. And all right. So another question is, would Valasta work better in conjunction with a PARP inhibitor for BRCA1 ovarian cancer, or would Valasta on its own yield similar results? I am currently taking Valasta with carboplatin, and side effects are reduced so much that I'm starting to feel like chemo is not working. What do you think is the best dosage for this would be?
Before we get into dosage, this is a great question, by the way, and we're seeing it more and more. There's some research done on pancreatic cancer where the NIH has been looking now at the synergistic effects of using chemo drugs in conjunction with the Valasta-based type of material. The results are pretty astounding. So there is some sort of a synergistic effect. But let me talk a little bit about BRCA1, BRCA2, and PARP. In a normal cell, we have 3 DNA repair mechanisms. We have when the ribose chain of a DNA has been attacked by a reactive oxygen species, and it comes apart. BRCA1, BRCA2 will go in and hopefully fix it exactly the way that it's supposed to be fixed. Sometimes it doesn't quite do that, and that's called a mutation. But typically it'll bring it back. When you're, so in a normal cell, you have 3 DNA repair mechanisms, BRCA1, BRCA2, and PARP. Cancer cells only have one. They only have PARP, typically, repair mechanism. So when they give you a chemo and they hit you with a huge concentration of hydroxyl free radical or peroxyl, alkyl peroxys, then what happens is the DNA goes in and mutates and it gets disrupted, but the cancer cell has a PARP DNA repair mechanism. It could go in and repair its DNA. So they give you what's called a PARP inhibitor. That PARP inhibitor stops the PARP from repairing the damaged DNA in hopes that the cancer cell will now die. The problem that we have is that the PARP inhibitor is not unique to cancer cells. It also stops PARP in normal cells. So if you're BRCA1, BRCA2 negative, and you take a PARP inhibitor, you cannot repair your normal cell DNA. So the risk of having cancer goes up dramatically with chemo treatments because the chemo is now giving you cell DNA mutation, and you're going to present with an 87% chance of having cancer in the next 1 to 5 years because of that. PARP inhibitors are good if you're BRCA1, BRCA2 positive because that helps protect the normal cells and it focuses it more on the cancer cells. I hope that answered the question.
Okay. So on a more personal level, they were saying they're currently taking Valasta with the carboplatin, and the side effects are reduced so much that I'm feeling like chemo is not worth it, I'll say. So then they get into the dosage question. That would be more on an individual basis, right?
Yeah, it would be. Anytime a platinum-based chemo is used, the platinum is used to generate free radicals. So, and it generates a lot of them. And the unfortunate part is it also has a tendency to linger in your body for a long period of time. Platinum is a heavy metal. It does not want to come out of your body very easily. So you are going to have some long-term effects of the accumulation of those platinum ions or even metallic platinum if it's reduced far enough. The dose, one of the things that we see with platinum-based chemo, carboplatinum-based chemo, is that when they take Valasta with it, it moderates the effect. And I really want to get into this too, because in most of them, when they go back in for their next CAT scan, they could see an increase in apparent tumor size. It has nothing to do with the tumor. And the CAT scan, MRI, and the PET scan cannot differentiate between an inflammatory response to a dead cancer cell or is it the cancer cell? It cannot be differentiated. There's been a lot of chemo given to people who only had an inflammatory response to the dead necrotic tumor, and the chemo ended up causing a tremendous amount of harm and damage to the person. So just because you see your CAT scan increase shortly after taking chemo or Valasta is not an indicator that your cancer is growing. It only means that there's a mass there that's larger than it was before. But now you've got to define, is that living cancer, dead cancer, and is that an inflammatory response? More white blood cells around it, more pus around it. It's trying to chew up the dead bodies on the battlefield. And the way that we track it is typically they're getting a CA number, a cancer marker. So typically what happens, your cancer marker is going up without any treatment. Everyone freaks out. I've got cancer. Increasing cancer mass increases your CA number. Then you have an intervention. It's either going to be chemo or Valasta or a combination. And you would typically think that the CA number would bend over and come down. What we see is characteristic of it. It's a spike. Your CA number creeps up to about 100. You go on the treatment, and with Valasta, and it shoots to 500. Everybody freaks out. They think it's directly related to cancer growth. It is not. What it's related to is the cancer cells have died, and all of the guts of the inside of the cancer cell has now been discharged into your blood system. So you see that spike of the dead cancer cells, membranes breaking down, and you see a huge inflammatory response around where the tumor was that can be 2 times larger than what the original cancer was. So it spikes. A couple weeks later, maybe a month later, you'll see it bend over, and the CA number will start to collapse very, very quickly. And once it comes back into the normal range, then your cancer is dead. But we all have this initiation phase of the cancer. We have the intervention. We have the transition from living to dead necrotic material. And then we see the cleanup phase, where your immune system goes in and has to clean up all the dead bodies on the battlefield.
Okay, so here's my question. So how do we know they're all dead?
It's a great question. The only way to know for sure is a couple of things that we look for. We expect the CA number to increase, but there's no increase in symptoms. Their energy level comes back, their appetite comes back, they're no longer in pain. That pretty much indicates the cancer is not growing. It's probably dead, but their CA number is going up. The only sure way to know is through a biopsy. You actually go in, pull tissue out, and look at it. The PET scan, macrophages, neutrophils, basophils, beta cells, they all consume sugar the same or even at a higher rate than the cancer cells do. So when you get a PET scan and the sugar goes into the macrophages, not into the cancer cells, you're going to get this irregular shaped tumor that's going to freak everybody out. But all it is your white blood cells all accumulated around the tumor to start dissolving it. So we look at distortion from the prior image. We look at symptoms. We look at your quality of life. Typically, people with cancer lose their appetite. They don't have any interest in eating. All of a sudden, their appetite comes back. The moment you start gaining weight, you're winning. That's a very, very good sign.
When does the CA start to come back down after the spike?
It depends on the type of cancer, and it depends on how good a shape you're in. Let me give you an example of one that I followed very, very closely. Was doing fine. Well, initially he was given 2 to 4 months. This was 3 years ago. We put him on Valasta, stopped the cancer. But when he went for a CAT scan, they showed an enlargement, a mass enlargement. And his was adenocarcinoma. And after about 2 months, went back in for another scan. They took a wait and see. He refused chemo at that point, went back in, his CA numbers crested and came back down again. They did a CAT scan, and now they found that the body had pretty much destroyed it. Well, that went on until this past fall, and his doctor convinced him that as a preventative, you probably need to go back on chemo as a preventative. So he chose to go back on to chemo, and the chemo wiped out his white blood cells. Took him from as high as 400 down to under 3. Lowest number I've ever seen in a human being in my life. So they had to stop that, and he passed away in April. I probably knew he was in trouble when they killed his immune system. And that's not unique, by the way. If your white blood cells are not capable of cleaning up the mess, you're not able to control the inflammatory response of that infection. It's not a bacterial infection, but it's almost the same as an infection. That inflammation is going to lead to more mutated DNA, and you've got to get it under control. So we can kill the cancer, we can get the white blood cells chewing everything up, but you've got to get the interleukin-6, you got to get the inflammatory markers under control so that they're not mutating other cells to give you another cancer scare later on in your life.
Okay. Well, back to the tumor that we were talking about and the cells in there. I've heard, and you can tell me what you believe about this. If you go to take a biopsy and not everything's dead in the tumor, that could spread the cancer. Is there any truth to that in your opinion?
Yeah, I've seen a number of them. I've looked at several hundred of those. I get a little concerned with the invasive determinations. Anytime that you crack what's called the extracellular matrix, our immune system will have a tendency to build a and try to put pressure on the cancer to keep it from growing. It's called an extracellular matrix, an ECM. When you break through that, you're actually helping the cancer. The ball or the cage that our immune system has built around it has been breached. So I've got very similar concerns when they go in and they do biopsies, they do surgeries, and they don't get it all. They've opened up a bag of worms.
Well, how different is that from what you're saying in whether it's the chemo, the Valasta, for whatever is being used, that's going to blow up the tumor and all these dead bodies will be laying if they didn't get them all? Is there a similar concern there at all, or is it
no?
different
Once
completely?
the necrosis once the necrosis starts, it's very difficult to keep it from killing everything. Once the T cells have been activated to identify that cancer, it's going to take it out. But you have to have a pretty strong immune system in place. If you've defeated your immune system by excess chemo, you may not be able to get it all. So there's some real downside risks. I keep telling people 100 years from now, we'll look back and we'll say, what in the world were we doing? But
yeah, but without even the chemo, which completely knocks out the immune system, I mean, the average lifestyle of the average person is living so unhealthy. Their immune system is so low as well, even without the chemo. So what if a person's dealing with this and they don't have are you talking about a completely wiped out immune system due to chemo, or because most people don't have a good immune system just because their lifestyle, right? So are all these people in just the same danger?
Yeah, the chemo is going to put even more pressure on it. You don't need more pressure on a degraded immune system. Anytime that you do that, you are going to have a decrease in the quality of your life every time you use chemo. It does have those kinds of effects. The real key to this is managing the inflammatory response. You've got to get it under control, and you've got to stop the interleukin-6 cytokine from launching an inflammatory response all throughout your body. And that's why I think the Valasta, and in synergy with a chemo treatment, may prove to be okay, because Valasta has a tendency to moderate a lot of the free radical, the shotgun pattern that chemo gives, it's just so overwhelming. There's nothing moderating. So it may have a, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on it, but they did it with gemcitabine on pancreatic cancer. And they found that gemcitabine alone didn't stop the cancer, but gemcitabine with the astaxanthin did stop. And the National Institute of Health has some research papers on that need to be put out.
Okay, that's such a great topic. Thank you for sharing that. So on a different topic, somebody's asking, does Valasta heal leaky gut?
If it's inflammatory, it will. Depends on what's causing leaky gut. It's typically inflammatory. It can, but I need a further definition of it. There's probably 6 causes that I know of that would cause fluids to move back and forth. Anytime some of those fluids get into the interstitial layers, you're always going to have an infection. You're going to have something that's going to be further aggravating it. But I'd like to know if it's Crohn's disease or is it of an inflammatory nature.
Okay. I want to talk about, I get a lot of questions, and I want to make sure everyone is using the Valasta to the best of their capability and the right way, about the dosaging and the color of the stool. So I was first under the impression, and people are, that at first you're going to overburden the system with excess of the astaxanthin, and the stool's going to be very red. And then this was my understanding. And then if you're getting results, let's say with arthritis, and you've seen the results, you can cut back a little, and your stool will not be as red as when you first started taking it. And somebody suggested even maybe you can start cutting back. But from my experience, as people are taking it and getting used to it, their stools aren't red. And the only way to get them red is if they add more. So should we be adding or cutting back if we're getting the results? Or do we go by the color of the stool?
A great question. There's 2 mechanisms of absorption we've been able to identify with the Valasta. The first one is chemical, in that when it hits the small bowel and that sugar shows up at the enzyme level, there's certain enzymes in the small bowel that'll grab that sugar because cells love glucose. That's the food that we use to keep everything alive. So that's the chemical absorption. It's diffusion controlled, it's enzymatically controlled. So you have to have the enzymes in place to capture that. The second one is called a concentration gradient, where it's brute force. If I increase a huge dose, and we've been as high as 3,000 milligrams per day, but if I increase the concentration, we get a very positive response with no side effects. That concentration gradient can drive it into your body at a very high rate, even if the enzymes aren't there. Now, typically what happens, we see that same pattern we were just talking about. We see the Valasta go in. The first 2 or 3 days gets very red in your stool. And then you'll see it slowly at the same dose level start to just sort of dampen out. It'll get more pale. What that is the enzymes now are recognizing it. Your body is using it. And as that concentration drops down in the body, the concentration gradient is driving more out of your small bowel and into your body. So if it completely disappears, it means your body is using it faster than you're putting it in. It needs it. So you should up the dose. Now, everybody's stress level changes daily within a 24-hour cycle. So you can cycle through based on what you've eaten, how much stress your children caused you during that day. There's a lot of stressors. So you can get variations in the need to have astaxanthin. So it might be red, it might not be as red, it might be red. So you can cycle through it. But if it completely disappears for longer than 3 days, you have no red color in your stool for longer than 3 days, something is causing stress, oxidative stress in your body. You're going to have to increase the dose. Now, about every 3 months at least, everybody should be running a C-reactive protein. So I tell people, go live your stressful life, but keep your C-reactive protein less than 3. Let's see how that works out for you. And if it gets above 3, you increase the dose. If it's below 3, experiment. Maybe you want to eat or drink orange juice, or you want to, consume a whole day of alcohol. Everybody's going to try it. So you sort of have to go with the flow in some cases.
Okay, so in terms of absorption, I know it comes with the capsules, and it's wonderful that it does, and I understand the understanding behind that, and it's just as pure, natural, and you put in a capsule yourself. But I also know, like the chocolate and your mom, and just giving it to her that way. But I know some people, like even myself, I just squirt it on my tongue now. I don't even use the capsules anymore. Now, is it more or less absorbable in a particular form? Like if you do it with a capsule or not, if you do it with a particular type of food, not, or is it just like get it in your body, the right dosage, and your body will use it? What's the answer to that?
There's a couple things. When we first started out, we really thought the hydrochloric acid in the stomach was going to wreak havoc with it. It turns out that the astaxanthin is way more overwhelming as an antioxidant than even the HCl that's in the stomach. It has tendency to donate a lot of electrons. So if you have an electron and you have excess hydrogen ions in the stomach, they can neutralize each other very quickly into water. So to be perfectly frank, I really don't know at this point. We erred on the side of getting it past the stomach by putting it in capsules and trying to get it into the duodenum as quickly as possible, to the small bowel as quickly as possible, where the bile neutralizes the hydrochloric acid, and then it dissolves in a very high pH in the small bowel, probably 10 to 11. So to answer this question, I don't know. I think sublingually, now that we have the glucose attached to the astaxanthin, under the tongue is a very high absorption area, very high surface area. There may be actually some absorption happening in your mouth before it ever gets to your stomach. There's some medicines that you actually do. Nitro, for example,
Sure.
is under the tongue. So to answer that question properly, I don't really know. We don't see any detrimental changes in efficacy, no matter how they take it. So I think maybe I was probably wrong about over concerned that the HCl was going to wipe it out.
Hey, is there a way a person can do their own experimentation? Like, so we know from the color of the stool to see how much is being absorbed. Maybe somebody could take capsules for 2 weeks and see how it is and take the same dosage without capsules. Maybe somebody could take it with food for 2 weeks and then take it with a different food or no food for 2 weeks and see with all of that if there's any change in the color and monitor it. Maybe that can give person some answers on a personal level.
Yeah, we could do that. It's it depends so heavily on the individual. Each one of those little experiments, we use what's called EVOP, evolutionary optimization, for doing a lot of the experimental studies. You might need 30 people for each one of those columns in the EVOP program to actually get a statistically significant analysis. But it's worth a shot. Since we can see the color in the stool, I'd be very interested in looking at it. When you take it by mouth, for example, Paul, is your stool still red?
I don't want to use me as an example right now, but but taking with food or without food or and so on. I could tell you when I first started taking it, my stool was very red, and I take the same dosage, and it's much less red now than it was when I first started taking it. But I don't use the capsules anymore. This is what I'm saying on a personal level. Can a person experiment on their own level without doing like studies with more people
Sure.
and figure out, look, I'm taking the same dosage. Every time I take it this way, it's red, and every time I take it that way, it's not. So maybe for me, this is what's best, right?
Absolutely. And there's two reasons why the red would change. It's either being absorbed at a much higher level. You measure that from your symptoms. Has your arthritis stayed away? Is there no more pain in your joints? Whatever you were treating for, was that symptom still there or not there? So that's one way of doing it. The other way is that how much of it's being neutralized, where you're losing the efficacy of it, and that's why, because it will change color as the electrons come off and the unsaturated double bonds begin to break from the acid in your stomach. It changes from being a red. For example, bleach. If you put bleach on astaxanthin, it turns totally clear. There's no more red color at all. That's an interesting little experiment to do. So you can experiment with it, but make sure you've got a way of measuring what your results are. Red stools, yeah, that's a quick way of telling, but it's the symptoms. We want to make sure.
Well, what if somebody's taking it like myself for preventative, not for symptoms, just for preventative? Then you don't have that measure of a symptom.
It's always difficult to prove that something didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
I run into this. How do you prove a negative? How do you prove that I'm
sure?
I would have gotten sick if I didn't.
Sure. So that's interesting about the bleach. Now, one of the questions I get from people often is, I got a stain on my shirt or a stain on something. Well, bleach. Well, you don't want to bleach a shirt because that'll make a problem worse. But in general, if they get on a hand or something, is that how to get rid of the color? Put a
bleach takes it off. Yeah, bleach takes it off very, very quickly. It neutralizes all those electrons on the astaxanthin, and you can watch it turn color right before your eyes.
Interesting. Okay, I have a super chat, and super chats get the first question. So thank you, Alico. The question is for MS. Does Valasta Astaxanthin cure, heal, or help MS?
We have several testimonies that are out there right now. It turns out that MS is an inflammatory disease, same as Parkinson's. That whole mentality and that approach has completely changed. We have people who were on canes in walkers, and all of a sudden, within 2 weeks, you'll know. If there's mechanical damage done from the MS, like joints or bones are rubbing, or there's actually atrophy to the point where your tendons and things aren't working properly, it's very difficult to get that back. That's a mechanical issue, not an inflammatory issue. But you'll know within 2 weeks of doing this whether your MS, your weakness that you're seeing in your muscles, is starting to come back. The things that we hear most from MS is their brain fog goes away. They wake up one morning and they go, I feel refreshed. There's something that's happened. It's just something you have to try, but you don't have to wait for 3 months. You don't have to wait for a month. It happens very, very quickly if it's going to happen. But I would suggest that you make sure you know what your C-reactive protein is before you go into it. And then you'll know whether the Valasta, it would give you a much higher security that maybe the Valasta will help. Parkinson's is one that shocked us all. We began to give it to people with arthritis, and lo and behold, unbeknownst to us, they also had Parkinson's. treming from 200 tremors per minute all the way up to 800 tremors per minute. They could not even hold food in their fork without throwing it. And 1 week after being on this, their tremors stopped. And that sent us back into the lab to try to figure out what was going on, because we thought for the longest time that Parkinson's was caused by a lack of dopamine in the brain, not being produced in the substantia nigra part of the brain. That's not what we found. What we found was that people with Parkinson's are still producing dopamine, but it's reacting with the hydroxyl free radical and it's forming a compound called oxydopamine. Oxydopamine is a chemical compound we give to animals to give them Parkinson's so that we can test Parkinson's medications on them. All of a sudden, we interrupt that dopamine hydroxyl reaction by removing the hydroxyl free radical, and their tremors stop. We got to be reassessing levodopa, treating the symptoms of Parkinson's with levodopa or carbidopa, thinking that it's a lack of dopamine in the brain. I'm not convinced anymore that that's what's causing Parkinson's. And
Okay.
MS is sort of the same way. I think it's an inflammatory disease.
Yeah. Now, if I'm correct, years ago they discovered that MS, if I'm correct, was some form of Epstein-Barr, and MS was pretty similar. I'm familiar with
It's
that?
whatever causes that inflammatory response, and it's actually autoimmune. It's your immune system run completely out of control. Viruses can cause that, by the way, but so can smoking, so can anything that adds ROS to your biology.
Okay. Well, we have a good amount of questions coming in, and we're running low on time here. But if you would like to see Sam on the show more, maybe a regular basis with a Q&A like this, let me know. Give me a thumbs up or put it in the comments, and we could maybe make it a regular segment if we can coordinate our schedules. But Sam, we're going to do like a little fast forward round robin round. I'm going to go through some questions and try to give us a brief answer just to help the people. And of course, if anyone wants more detail, let me know, and me and Sam could do a non-live video in more detail about these particular topics. So somebody says, and a lot of these are already answered in my previews with him and also on the website, but it says, what about rheumatoid arthritis? How long until we see results?
Anywhere from 3 to 7 days. It's quick.
Okay. Great. The next question is, somebody says, my 85-year-old dad has skin cancer and has squamous cell carcinoma and 2 lymph nodes in his neck. They want to do immunotherapy. Should instead I go with Valasta or use both?
At this point, I'd use both. The synergistic effect, again, is one that's very positive. You're going to get some side effects from the, I'm not sure if it's Keytruda, Opdivo, or Yervoy. I'm not sure what the chemo drug is that they would use. But you're going to get some side effects from that. And we've had these discussions about right-handed, left-handed molecules. Well, the immunotherapy drugs are both, they're chiral, they're right-handed and left-handed molecules. The left-handed molecule seems to work against the disease. The right-hand molecule causes side effects. So there is some risk when you do immunotherapy. There is no downside. Valasta is all left-handed molecule, so there's no side effects to it.
Okay. How do you know when PV is considered cured?
Well, in my case, I stopped being phlebotomized. Mine was pretty easy to monitor. It was deadly. My hemoglobin was climbing at a pretty high rate over a 30-day period. So I had to be phlebotomized every month. And so I had a target. When my hemoglobin hit 19, I had to go be phlebotomized. And I would knock that down to about 14 and watch it climb back up again, go do it again. My highest hemoglobin was 27, which was unheard of. Usually somebody strokes out. My blood pressure, highest blood pressure I had was 280 over 160. And that was that's pretty bad. I didn't stroke. I did get AFib, and I did get an enlarged heart out of it before they thought I had some sort of coronary artery disease. All that came back negative, and then I was told that I had PV. And but for me, it was pretty simple. I no longer had to climb out on my hemoglobin.
What does PV stand for?
Polycythemia vera.
Okay. Okay. All right. Somebody says here, I'm using the salve and the Valasta, dealing with lots of pain. How do you feel about CBD, THC to control pain? What would you recommend? My CRP is 3.
Yeah, it's got to be, it should be under 3. We need to do a little more work there. I'd be much happier if it was down 1.5 to 2.5. But hemp oil does have some short-term effects on pain. The problem is there's no longevity to it. It might last maybe 2 hours at the most, and then you have to do it again. That's the only downside I have with hemp oil. The flavonoids that are in hemp oil are antioxidant, but they're also they can relieve pain and terminate some of the receptors on the end of nerve cells. We have actually hemp in one of our products where people that are late stage cancer, where they're dealing with pain issues, we actually give them that on the short term to try to mediate some of the pain. But the astaxanthin in there then begins to cause the cancer to go necrotic, and they begin to see that pain disappear. So one is to fix the pain level, the other one is to eradicate it completely. So that's what that product is supposed to do.
Okay. Is this good for someone that has bad intestinal problems?
Excellent. IBS, irritable bowel, Crohn's, and that one happens very quickly too. Your bowels will straighten up very quickly. That is one of the very first ones that we knew we were onto something when the inflammation in the bowel was eradicated in less than a week. You start seeing differences.
Absolutely. What about HIV? Can it help that in any way?
It doesn't work on viruses. It works on the inflammation caused by viruses. So let me go through a little bit here. All viruses create an inflammatory response. COVID is the one we're all aware of now. COVID causes ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. It turns on interleukin-6, it turns off the brakes to your immune system, which is interleukin 10, interleukin 11. This COVID virus causes that inflammatory response. HIV and herpes does the same thing. They create, if your immune system is any way depressed and you can't combat the inflammatory response from that virus, once you get a virus, you have it for the rest of your life. I don't care whether it's the CMV, the cytomegalovirus that causes mononucleosis, herpes viruses, cold sores, COVID. You have that virus that lives in your spinal cord or in your fluid from your brain forever. Chickenpox, for example, when people get shingles, their immune system breaks down, the virus sees an opportunity, comes down the sheath of the nerve, and all of a sudden breaks out at the nerve ends, and you get these lesions all across your side. That's an inflammatory response. And now with COVID, Valasta stops the inflammatory response. I had a doctor tell me when I got COVID, it's the only thing that saved your life. And because I had nothing else at that point. But my C-reactive protein got up to 28 with COVID, and that freaked me out. I told him, I said, when I asked him, and he said 28, I said, oh my golly. And he said, what do you think it should be? I said, it should be less than 3. And he turned to me and he says, you know what the C-reactive protein is for COVID patients? And I said, no. He said, a good outcome is 200. A bad outcome is over 1,000. He said, we have 4 doctors trying to figure out why yours is only 28. So we had a long discussion about Valasta, and I was released 3 days later. Anything that deals with inflammation, I can't stop the viruses, but I can stop the response, the inflammatory response that those viruses are going to initiate in an immune compromised individual.
Okay, so back to the viruses. When we look at that, so the herpes breakout or HIV, all due to a low immune system or something that triggers that. Are you suggesting that maybe somebody who had COVID, so it stays in their body, maybe let's say 5 years down the line, they get diagnosed with cancer and they start doing chemo? Can the symptoms of COVID come back?
The virus is still there. All viruses could come out. Anytime your immune system gets distressed, that's the opportunity for these viruses to make their break. There's one called CMV, the mononucleosis virus, the cytomegalovirus. 92% of all hypertensive human beings have no clue as to why they have high blood pressure. It turns out that when we look at it from an epidemiological point of view, we find that most of those have had mononucleosis. And it's the CMV virus. And now there's reports that you can pull up, research reports of hypertension and NIH and CMV. And now they've correlated the CMV virus as a vasoconstrictor. And that's what's causing the undiagnosed hypertension.
So from what you're saying, you'd be in agreement that if somebody did something to knock out their immune system in the future, they can have a relapse of the symptoms of COVID later on in life if they've got it.
We don't see it yet, but that possibility in the way viruses act is absolutely in line with your comment. How many people get sick with a common virus cold and then break out in shingles? It happens all the time, especially in the elderly when that they don't have an antioxidant protecting.
On the other hand, if you already have a virus, it's supposed to help you from catching it again, right? They say like chickenpox.
Your immune system has to respond to it to keep you from getting it again. So you can get dosed again from viruses just because you've had COVID once.
And the different variants and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Somebody's asking about low thyroid. Will it help with low thyroid?
It depends on what's causing it's typically hypothyroidism.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is inflammatory. It's an autoimmune response that's for some reason targeting your thyroid. There's several research reports out there now and papers showing that it is combatable simply by reducing your inflammatory disease state. So measure your C-reactive protein. A lot of doctors say that the C-reactive protein is meaningless. That's because they have no way of getting it lower without giving you massive doses of steroids, which have its own problem. So get your C-reactive protein, get that number less than 3, and you'll probably start weaning yourself off of your thyroid medication.
Okay. Why do people have trouble sleeping when they take it late at night?
There's a couple theories. I'm not really sure why, but I can't take it at night either. My brain is going. So I don't take it up to about 5 hours before I go to bed. And I think the reason is because it causes an electrical response. Some of it is, it does cross the blood-brain barrier. So you do see some additional electrical activity, I think, caused by it as it's working. I take it always in the morning, and I have no problem sleeping at night.
Okay. Somebody says my 50-year-old has fractured ribs, severe pain, osteoporosis. What do you suggest for healing this fractured rib? So I guess with the Valasta, does Valasta help osteoporosis in any way?
It can be used as a wound healer. And the way it works is anytime that a wound heals, there's two things going on. There's an inflammatory response to put in all the osteoblasts that's going to repair the bone and re-put calcium in and do all that. Well, that's an inflammatory response. Anytime you have an inflammatory response, the rate of generation of new cells has to equal or be greater than the rate at which that inflammatory response is killing those new cells. So if the rate of destruction, this happens with bed sores, by the way, if the rate of destruction, the inflammatory response is greater than its ability to generate new cells to heal, the wound is going to get bigger, more infected, and you're probably going to go septic. So what we want to do is slow down the degradation effects, the two-edged sword of inflammation. We want to slow down the cellular death caused by inflammation, and Valasta does that. So the wound will heal much faster. But how do you measure a negative again? Okay, normally it heals in 2 weeks. I don't know how long it would take for her, but now it heals in 5 days. How do you correlate that becomes a bit of a problem.
Wonderful. Okay. So on the bottle, it says that the olive oil one, it has the astaxanthin, the olive oil, then it says it has omega-6 DHA. So is that just from the olive oil, or like what is that something else added?
The olive oil that we're using now doesn't have DHA6, omega-6 in it. During the extraction process of the astaxanthin, since it comes from an algae, the algae, which is Haematococcus pluvialis, generates both omega-6 and omega-3 oils. They're typically called fish oils. That's where all fish oil comes from. But they're usually in equal doses. And we don't see the negative impacts of omega-6. We don't see them posing a problem right now. I don't have any documentation that the levels that we're looking at from the extracted astaxanthin is causing any sort of a problem. I think omega-3s and omega-6 in balance sort of counteract each other to some extent.
Sure, but it says on the label omega-6 DHA. So is that something else that's added after you extract it and put it back in, or no? Okay.
No, that's part of the extraction of the astaxanthin in the supercritical extraction process.
Okay. And as for the essential fatty acids, people often ask, is Valasta an essential fatty acid? It doesn't have that correct omega-6 balance, where an omega-3 balance, where it's not considered to be dealt with that, correct?
Yeah, we don't see any real problems with it at all. It's just what we get when we extract it out of the algae. Let me give you an example. They're listed as fish oils. And fish oil doesn't come from fish. Fish oil comes from algae. And it was first processed by squeezing fish and getting the oil out of it. But the fish gets it from eating the single-celled organism of algae, and it bioaccumulates it. It can't use it. So it just accumulates in the fish tissue, and that's how we got it. When I did work for the Department of Defense, we recognized very quickly that fish oil comes from algae. That's the source of it. And we use that to make, just like biodiesel, we made aviation fuel out of it.
Yeah, most products animal eats, and by the time you get it, it's in a reduced state and so on. So why is there so much more of the essential fatty acids in fish than in the actual algae that they're getting it from?
It's called bioaccumulation. We see it with some metals, also mercury and tuna, because it's ingested faster than it's being wasted. And that is a serious problem when you're looking at some heavy metals. Now they're at a point where they tell you how much tuna you should eat a week because of the bioaccumulation of mercury or heavy metals. Whenever the rate of waste is lower than the rate of ingestion, you're accumulating these in the tissues that you're going to eat. In minus out equals accumulation. And if the out term goes to zero, what comes in goes directly into inventory.
Okay. Somebody says they're asking about benefits with pets and Valasta, but there's a lot to it. If you want to briefly mention that, because we got to roll through these questions. We only have a few more minutes left.
Okay. We are currently providing it for dogs and cats. I have shipped the material into a horse farm in Florida, and I'm not going to go into details with that, but it does stop arthritis in animals. It stops cancer. My own dog, Duke, in 2018, August 2018, was diagnosed with anal gland cancer. I was told he had 3 weeks. I'd have to put him down. I brought him home, gave him very high doses of astaxanthin, and he died 3 weeks ago of old age. He was 17 years old, and his bowels stopped working. But his cancer went completely away in less than 30 days. Most of the work that was done with astaxanthin was done on dogs and monkeys. The research papers that we've been able to uncover so far show that it works perfectly fine on mammals. I don't have any data to show that it works on reptiles or snakes or anything, but they typically don't get these diseases either. But for cats, dogs, birds, it does work on horses, arthritis, joint pain in horses.
Okay, everybody, where Sam and I could talk for hours and answer questions for hours, but we're trying to keep it under an hour because we don't want questions to get lost in the discussion. But we will come back again. We got a lot of thumbs up to do this on a regular basis, but we're going to take 3 more questions. And if we didn't get to your questions, I will hold them for the next session. And sorry about that, but we're doing our best. So somebody had a question about toddlers and what was it? Autism. So like, I guess I know you mentioned somewhere about a warning about, not in a negative way, about younger children taking it or something. So what about toddlers? Can toddlers take it? And does it affect, I know it's great on autism in general and older children, but what about toddlers and autism?
I'd have to know why the toddler is taking it. There's no reason. Typically, genetically, toddlers are producing enough cellular antioxidant in the form of glutathione to protect them against a lot of these diseases. So I'd have to really understand, why are you giving this to a child when they're probably already protected? Now, some children are born without a genetic predisposition to produce glutathione, and you see the childhood cancers as a result of that. They can't stop the ROS buildup that's accumulating in their little bodies, even at that young age. So they end up with diseases. The same as old people who can't produce glutathione in their old age. So they get diseases. But there has to be a reason, Paul, why you're giving it to a child, not just because you want to or you're afraid. Fear is no reason to do anything.
But in general, children, it's okay. Younger children, right?
Yeah, we don't have any reason to see any sort of side effects from a purely clinical discussion. But I would really want to know why you're doing that. And fear or anticipation is not a reason.
Would you consider it? I know we discussed it in the past for pregnant women or breastfeeding women. Would you consider it a benefit for both? I know you showed me some reports where it was.
Yeah, there's some indications that after the first trimester, it's not going to do any damage at all. It might even do some help. But the only concern I have, and this is purely from my perspective in understanding the biochemistry of this, when you have stem cells producing organs. Stem cells are activated by an inflammatory response. That's what activates it. I don't know if I want to suppress that in that first trimester. So that becomes, and that's only I have no reason to say that, but from a biochemical fundamental point of view, I'm going to err on the side of saying during that period when their stem cells are trying to determine whether I'm going to make a heart muscle or an arm, I don't really want anything in there that's going to suppress that. So that's
Well, that's an extremely important subject that I think should be more spoken about in the future, because so what you're saying is you don't see anything wrong with somebody after the first trimester taking it. It might be beneficial, but during that first trimester, there's no studies or reports, but you get the feeling it might not be the best idea.
Yeah, I don't want to stop stem cell because stem cells are activated by free radicals. Now, if I suppress those free radicals, what happens to those stem cells? Where are they getting their signals from? It's just from a biochemist dealing with it. I don't have the answers to that, but boy, I'd take a hard look and try to do a lot more research.
Okay. Somebody's asking, will it help with AS or spondylitis AS? Familiar with that?
They're all, anything that ends in an itis, an itis,
It's
is
inflammation,
inflammatory. Yeah, it's inflammation. So it's one of those things that'll do no harm, but boy, could it be beneficial. We have several people taking it for that right now, also for edema type conditions, having tremendous results. So the nice thing about Valasta is you'll know within 30 days. So it can happen pretty quickly. And the swelling, the edema that comes with that is going to be greatly diminished. You're going to see it probably go away.
Great. Last question or topic that I think is important to talk about is people that are on blood thinners or blood pressure medicine. It's often doctors will tell you, well, you can't eat greens or take certain medicines, but if they see it coming down, they should tell you to get off the blood thinners and so on, but they don't often do that. So can you explain briefly with the blood thinners and blood pressure in general, the two medications people got to be careful with if they're using Valasta to lower or thin out the blood, and when they should consider getting off their medicine? I know ultimately they got to ask their doctor, but if you could just give a warning or just something.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to get into that side of it. I'm going to deal with it from a researcher's point of view here. Typically, when we would start the Valasta on people that are taking warfarin or heparin or currently on blood thinners, we see their SED rates, and you can measure your clotting factor. But typically, what's causing your blood to clot is the P-selectin in the endothelial cells in the arteries are sticking. They're very tacky. And all of that is electrostatic. It's caused by those inflammatory, some of them are the RNS, which are reactive nitrogen species, but some of them are, and most of them are probably the oxidative species. So when you take Valasta and that inflammation goes away and you're taking warfarin or heparin, your blood is going to get very thin. You don't give warfarin and heparin to normal blood clotting patients. So you've got to monitor it. It's the same thing with metformin and insulin for type 2 diabetics, because your blood sugar will drop. You're becoming normal. So once those adhesive characteristics of the clotting factors, and you need to measure them frequently during this period, because you're going to have to reduce. You're going to become normal. You're going to see your blood come back into a normal pattern.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Sam, thank you so much for taking these questions tonight. And if everybody wants to see more, I have a bunch of wonderful videos with Sam on the website, reallifehealthshow.com, and also on YouTube. And if you're interested in getting the Valasta, I'll put the link below the video here after the interview here. And Sam, thank you so much for taking the time. And we still have a lot of unanswered questions. Can we come back and do this again?
Oh, absolutely. And we're getting closer and closer to the reality of it. There's more and more doctors now thinking that, yeah, we're probably onto something. We now have oncologists asking them to go on Valasta before they do chemo, which 3 years ago, as you know, that was never gone through. Now they're rethinking their position once they understand the chemistry. And all the doctors have been trained in this. This is not something unique to me, I taught biochemistry at a university in Houston, and a lot of them were pre-med students. They knew this, but they forgot it. And maybe it's just now time to bring it back.
Absolutely. And as I'm holding a bottle in my hand, I want to give everybody a tip that some of my clients had given me. So when you get down to the bottom of the bottle, you don't know what it is, but when you start pumping it and it's air, you kind of know it's towards the end of it. Turn it upside down for a couple of days and you can get some extra pumps out of it. That's one of the great tips that I get from people. I have actually had people cut it open and grab a couple of drops out of it. So when they were at the end of it, but it's just wonderful. I love it. And look, there's thousands of supplements and products out there, everybody. And I only have not less than a handful on my website because I do the research and I know what works. And Sam, thank you for doing this and everything you're doing. And we appreciate your time. Thank you.
You too. You've done an outstanding job with getting the word out.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for getting this. And please continue to get it and let us know how it's working for you. And if you have any other questions, we'll be back again. This is Sam Shepherd from Valasta, and I'm Paul Neeson with the Real Life Health Show. Have a great day, everybody, and have a great real life. Okay.